invention wasn't always about brilliance, but about brokenness. What if the spark didn't come from genius, but from grief? All around us are objects born not in labs, but in loss, not in experiments, but in emotional turning points. This episode isn't about blueprints. It's about backstories, where behind the design is a beating heart, and behind the function is a feeling too powerful to ignore. Welcome back to Everyday Inventions, where behind every object is a story, and sometimes a beating heart. In our last episode, we uncovered how chance encounters and happy accidents reshaped the world. A moldy petri dish, a melted chocolate bar, mistakes that became miracles. But invention isn't always the child of chaos. Sometimes, it's born in a quiet moment, a whisper of grief, a flicker of hope, the kind of moment where emotion, not logic, takes the lead. Today, we pull back the curtain on a different kind of innovation, one fueled by love, heartbreak, loyalty, and longing. Because behind some of history's greatest creations wasn't a eureka, but a need to heal, a promise kept, a friend remembered, a pain transformed into purpose. When you mix raw emotion with a curious mind, you don't just get an invention, you get a lifeline, a legacy, something unforgettable. So whether it's a tool that saved lives, a toy that brought comfort, or a system that gave dignity, get ready to see how human hearts shaped human history. Next, the story behind the Braille system. Louis Braille was just 3 years old when a simple accident changed everything. A sharp tool, meant for leatherworking in his father's shop, slipped from his tiny hands and pierced his eye. The wound grew infected, and in a cruel twist of fate, the infection spread to both eyes. By the time he was 5, the world had gone dark. But Louis wasn't content to live in silence. While others pitted his blindness, he was busy imagining a world where people like him could not just survive, but read, write, learn, and lead. At just 15 years old, while most teens were still figuring out who they were, Louis was already inventing who he would become. He learned about night writing, a code the military used to send silent messages in the dark, and saw potential in its raised dot system. It was clunky, inefficient, so he made it better. He trimmed it down to 6 dots, just 6 simple points that, in various combinations, could unlock an entire language. By 20, he had finished perfecting what the world now knows as Braille. Elegant, tactile, empowering. But like many visionaries, Louis didn't live to see his work recognized. His system was dismissed during his lifetime, too radical, too unfamiliar. It wasn't until years after his death that Braille was adopted around the world. Today, those 6 dots appear everywhere. On elevator buttons, on pill bottles, on ATMs, debit cards, and dollar bills. A silent alphabet giving voice to millions. Louis Braille gave the blind more than a tool. He gave them access, independence, a future. His invention didn't come from a laboratory. It came from pain, and from the refusal to let that pain define him. Next, we shall examine the story of Josephine Cochrane and the dishwasher. In 1886, Josephine Cochrane stood at a crossroads, her heart heavy with grief. Her husband had just passed away, leaving behind not just a broken home, but a mountain of debt. Grief might have flattened others, but not Josephine. She looked around her kitchen, where the last straw had already fallen, shattered porcelain. Her fine china, heirlooms from her family, chipped and cracked by careless hands. Servants, though well-meaning, couldn't keep up. So she decided, if no one else can wash them properly, I'll build something that can. Not trained, not formally schooled in engineering, just driven. Josephine sketched designs at her kitchen table, surrounded by teacups and blueprints. She envisioned wire compartments for different dish sizes, a wheel to rotate them, and jets of hot, pressurized water. It was clever, efficient, and entirely hers. With grit and precision, she created a wooden box-like machine with pulleys, gears, and water pipes, the first practical mechanical dishwasher. At first, no one in her social circles took it seriously. But hotels and restaurants? They saw the genius. It wasn't long before her invention was cleaning up in commercial kitchens across America. And eventually, decades later, it came home. Today, the hum of a dishwasher in nearly every kitchen owes its rhythm to Josephine's resilience. She didn't set out to launch a revolution. She just wanted clean dishes and a little peace. But in solving her own problem, she helped solve millions more. Her story reminds us, innovation doesn't always come from labs and degrees. Sometimes, it starts with a broken heart and a refusal to break with it. Up next, we will take a closer look of the story of Mary Anderson and the windshield wiper. It was a cold, rainy day in New York City, turn of the 20th century. Mary Anderson, a Southern woman visiting the bustling North, sat bundled inside a streetcar. She wasn't just watching the rain. She was watching the driver, who had to open the window every few minutes just to see the road. Wiping the glass with a rag, getting soaked, shivering, slowing down traffic, endangering lives. Mary could have just looked away, but she didn't. She thought of her friends back home in Alabama, especially one, an elderly woman whose health was fragile. Rainy days meant isolation. No fresh air. No travel. Just walls and waiting. Mary wondered, what if we could sweep the rain away without stopping the world? By the time she returned home, the idea had taken root. She grabbed pencil and paper and began to sketch. A spring-loaded lever. A rubber blade on a pivoting arm. Operated manually from inside the car, so no one had to risk freezing or fumbling with cloths. In 1903, she received a patent for it, the first functional windshield wiper. But the world wasn't ready. Automobiles were still novelties, playthings of the wealthy. Manufacturers shrugged. Some even laughed. Why would anyone need that? Mary held her ground. She knew time would prove her right. And it did. As cars became common, so did speed and danger. And suddenly, Mary's once-dismissed invention became essential. Today, from taxis in Tokyo to trucks in Toronto, her legacy slices through every storm. A simple sweep that makes millions of journeys possible. But behind it was more than mechanics. There was care, observation, compassion. Mary didn't build the windshield wiper for fame. She built it for people, to keep them safe, to keep them moving, to keep them seen. The invention of the hearing aid was also born out of love, and it began in the twilight of the 19th century. A young man named Miller Reese Hutchison faced a silent heartbreak. His close friend was slowly slipping into a world without sound. Most people might have offered sympathy. Some might have drifted away, unsure of how to connect. But Hutchison? He opened his toolbox. Armed with curiosity, compassion, and a head full of circuits, he began to think. 4 months, he toiled through trial and error in a modest workshop, where wires snaked across benches and the buzz of electricity was a daily symphony. And in 1898, he did something no one else had. He built the Acophone, the world's first electric hearing aid. Sure, it was bulky. Strapped to a battery pack and worn like a strange headset, it looked more like a science experiment than a solution. But it worked. For the first time in years, Hutchison's friend could hear laughter. Footsteps. The gentle lilt of a conversation once lost. What Hutchison gave wasn't just sound. It was dignity. It was connection. It was the return of a vital human sense. And the best part? He didn't do it for money. He did it because he couldn't bear to see his friend left out of the world. His invention was born not out of necessity or commercial gain, but love, loyalty, and a refusal to accept silence. Fast forward to today, those sleek hearing aids tucked behind ears, the cochlear implants changing children's futures, even Bluetooth devices whispering music in our ears, they all trace back to that one act of friendship. Because sometimes, the most groundbreaking ideas begin with simply caring enough to try. The story of artificial heart and love for a dying wife is next. Paul Winchell was known for making puppets talk. A ventriloquist with charm, wit, and a spot on Saturday morning television. But behind the curtain, life took a somber turn. His wife was gravely ill. And laughter, his currency, couldn't heal her. So Paul, driven by desperation and love, did something no one expected. He rolled up his sleeves and started inventing. By the late 1950s, Winchell co-developed a prototype of the artificial heart, long before many believed it was even possible. A performer by trade but in private? A tinkerer. a dreamer, a man determined to give others the time he nearly lost. Decades later, a young medical student named Robert Jarvik would carry that idea further, haunted by memories of his own father's battle with heart disease. Jarvik didn't just see valves and chambers. He saw second chances. He refined the device into something surgeons could implant, a machine that literally stood in for a broken heart. And together, these two men, one from showbiz, one from science, created something astonishing. The artificial heart isn't just a marvel of engineering. It's a love letter to every family who sat beside a hospital bed praying for more time. It's proof that innovation doesn't always start in a lab. Sometimes, it begins with the ache of watching someone you love fade away. Today, artificial hearts help thousands survive when their own hearts give out. Behind the cold metal and sterile tubing is something deeply, profoundly human. Memory. And the belief that love might outlive the body. The story behind the teddy bear. In 1902, deep in the woods of Mississippi, U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt was on a hunting trip. After hours of tracking, his guides found a bear, cornered and tied to a tree. They called the president over, urging him to take the shot. But Roosevelt refused. It would be unsportsmanlike, he said. That simple act of mercy, a small moment of humanity, made headlines. Newspapers printed political cartoons, poking fun at Teddy's soft heart. But somewhere in Brooklyn, a humble toymaker and his wife, Morris and Rose Mictum, saw something else. They didn't see satire. They saw kindness. And that night, they stitched a soft stuffed bear, round ears and button eyes, and placed it in their shop window. They called it Teddy's Bear. It wasn't designed by a team of psychologists. It wasn't backed by focus groups or business forecasts. It was born from a gesture, one man's refusal to be cruel. What happened next? Children flocked to it. Letters poured in. The bear became more than a toy. It became a companion, a source of comfort, a symbol of safety in an uncertain world. From wartime nurseries to modern bedrooms, from handmade gifts to global brands, the teddy bear has never stopped reminding us that gentleness is a strength. And to this day, tucked into tiny arms and hospital beds, backpacks and memory boxes, Teddy's Bear is still there. Not just as a toy, but as a story where empathy became invention. In review, what do all these inventions share? They didn't begin in factories. They began in living rooms, in hospital beds, in quiet corners of grief or bursts of joy. They began with a feeling, not a formula. A mother worried about her child. A friend who wanted to help another hear. A widow with broken dishes and no time to mourn. They didn't set out to change the world. They set out to fix a small problem for someone they loved. But love, it has a way of growing. Before the wires, the patents, the prototypes, came emotion. Frustration. Tenderness. The heart behind the invention was always beating louder than the machine itself. Because innovation isn't just mechanical, it's deeply human. When you read with Braille, when you rinse your plates with a dishwasher, when you hug a teddy bear, you're not just using an object. You're holding someone's story, their sorrow, their love, their wild belief that something good could come from pain. In every invention passed down, there's an unspoken message. This helped me, maybe it will help you too. And that's what keeps the world turning. Not just gears, but hearts. At Everyday Inventions, we celebrate more than just the things we use. We celebrate the people behind them, the ones who dared to care, who didn't wait for permission or prestige. They simply saw a need and answered it with heart. Today's stories were about love turned into legacy, grief turned into guidance, compassion turned into tools that still touch our lives. And next time, we shift from tenderness to tenacity. In our next episode, we explore inventions born from survival, created not in comfort, but in the chaos of war, crisis, and disaster. Tools forged in urgency. Innovations that came from necessity, when life was on the line, and thinking fast meant staying alive. Because survival, too, can spark brilliance. So if today's episode moved you, share it. Subscribe. Leave a comment below. And maybe take a moment to thank someone whose quiet care helped you carry on. Because behind every brilliant idea is a human story worth telling.